In January 2022, a U.S. civil lawsuit tied to Jeffrey Epstein pushed Prince Andrew out of public royal duties after years of growing scandal. But behind that headline, another story quietly began to surface. Reports, claims, and insider whispers started pointing toward uncomfortable family decisions involving Sarah Ferguson and her daughters. What really happened during those years when Epstein's name kept appearing near royal circles, and what were the York sisters allegedly asked to do? The last question leaves a shadow hanging over the York family. And to understand why, we need to go back to the scandal that refused to disappear. For years, the name Jeffrey Epstein moved through powerful circles with little public attention. Epstein was a wealthy financier who had connections with famous people, politicians, and business leaders. But behind that powerful image was something darker. In the early 2000s, Epstein was investigated for crimes involving underage girls. In 2008, he reached a controversial plea deal in Florida with federal prosecutors. A plea deal means a legal agreement where a person admits guilt to certain charges to avoid a bigger trial. The deal allowed him to serve a short sentence in jail. Many people later said the deal was too soft. Then everything changed in July 2019. Federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York arrested Epstein again. This time the charges were serious: sex trafficking of minors. Sex trafficking means forcing or manipulating young people into sexual acts for money or power. The arrest sent shockwaves around the world. Newspapers, TV networks, and investigators began asking one big question: who were Epstein's powerful friends? Among the names that appeared again and again was Prince Andrew, the second son of Queen Elizabeth II. Andrew had once been seen at events with Epstein. Photos from the past suddenly became global headlines. One image from 2001 caused the most attention. It showed Prince Andrew standing next to Virginia Giuffre, a woman who later accused Epstein and others of abuse. Andrew has always denied the allegations. Still, the photos spread everywhere. Suddenly, the scandal was no longer just about a wealthy financier. It was touching one of the most famous royal families in the world. Think about this for a moment. A British prince was now linked in headlines to one of the biggest criminal scandals of the decade. Even though Andrew denied wrongdoing, the public pressure was enormous. Governments, charities, and royal watchers all started asking questions. And the questions were not only about Andrew. Here's the part many people missed. The scandal slowly began pulling attention toward the rest of the York family, including Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's former wife, and their daughters Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie. For years, the York sisters had lived fairly private lives compared with other royals. They worked regular careers and appeared at events only sometimes. But as the Epstein story grew louder in 2019, reporters began looking at the entire circle around Andrew. What did his family know? What had they seen? And most importantly, how were they reacting behind palace doors? Those questions would soon grow even bigger. Because the timeline shows something unusual happening inside the York household. That unusual timeline inside the York household raised new questions. The spotlight was no longer only on Prince Andrew. It was slowly moving toward the rest of his family. To understand why, we need to look at the York family itself. Prince Andrew married Sarah Ferguson in 1986. The world called her Fergie. She quickly became one of the most famous royal figures of that time. But the marriage did not last. In 1996, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson officially divorced. A divorce means the legal end of a marriage. Yet something unusual happened after the separation. Even after the divorce, Andrew and Fergie stayed close. They continued living near each other and raising their two daughters together, Princess Beatrice, born in 1988, and Princess Eugenie, born in 1990. For many years, the York daughters lived somewhat outside the main royal spotlight. They were not senior working royals like Prince William or King Charles III. Instead, they built their own careers. Princess Beatrice worked in the business and technology world. She held positions in companies connected to strategy and digital work. Princess Eugenie, on the other hand, built a career in the art industry. She worked at galleries and helped organize art exhibitions. Their lives looked modern, more like young professionals than traditional royals. But everything changed after one moment in November 2019. That was when Prince Andrew sat down for the now famous interview with BBC Newsnight journalist Emily Maitlis. The interview was meant to explain Andrew's connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Instead, it created a storm. Clips from the interview spread across television and social media within hours. Newspapers across the United Kingdom and the United States began analyzing every word Andrew said. Public reaction was harsh. Some commentators said the interview raised more questions than answers. Now watch what happens next. The media attention began expanding outward, almost like circles in water after a stone drops in. Journalists started looking again at old photographs, guest lists, charity events, and travel records connected to Andrew's social life. Every connection from the past was suddenly interesting. And that meant the York family name appeared more often in headlines. Some reporters began asking about events where the York sisters were present. Others looked at their friendships, their public appearances, and their connections to people in powerful circles. Think about this. For two women who had mostly lived outside the royal drama, this sudden attention was intense. They had done nothing directly related to the Epstein investigation. Yet their father's name kept pulling them into the story. And behind the scenes, according to several royal commentators, quiet conversations were reportedly taking place inside the family. What should the York sisters do next? Should they speak publicly, stay silent, or step away from attention completely? Those decisions would soon become very important, because the next chapter reveals how the Epstein connection first reached the royal circle. The spotlight on the York family did not appear out of nowhere. To understand the pressure they faced, we need to go back years, long before the 2019 headlines. The connection between Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein reportedly began in the early 2000s. At that time, Epstein was known as a wealthy financier who moved among powerful people. His parties in New York, Palm Beach, and other cities attracted celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. In elite social circles, introductions often happened through mutual friends. One of the key figures linked to Epstein's social network was Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite. Maxwell reportedly introduced Epstein to several high-profile individuals. Among them, according to multiple media reports, was Prince Andrew. For years, the connection did not receive much attention. Andrew had served in the Royal Navy and later became a royal representative for trade. In 2001, he was even appointed UK Special Representative for International Trade and Investment, a role that involved meeting business leaders and visiting different countries. In that world, meeting wealthy financiers was not unusual. But one photograph would later change everything. The image was taken in 2001 in London. It showed Prince Andrew standing beside Virginia Giuffre, with Ghislaine Maxwell in the background. Years later, Giuffre alleged that she had been trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and forced to meet powerful men, including Andrew. Andrew has strongly denied those allegations. Still, when the photograph resurfaced after Epstein's 2019 arrest, it spread across global media. News organizations in the United Kingdom, the United States, and beyond began re-examining every moment of Andrew's past connection to Epstein. Here's the part most people miss. Many of these connections were social, not criminal. Being photographed with someone does not mean a person committed wrongdoing. But in public life, perception can be powerful. And perception can damage reputations quickly. Investigators and journalists began reviewing flight records, party invitations, and guest lists connected to Epstein's network. Some reports claimed Epstein had visited properties connected to influential people. However, many details remain disputed or unconfirmed. Think about the scale of this situation. A scandal involving a financier in the United States had now reached the British royal family, one of the most visible institutions in the world. And once the media attention started, it moved fast. Now watch what happens next. In November 2019, Prince Andrew tried to answer the questions directly during a television interview. The goal was simple: explain his side of the story and calm the crisis. But instead of ending the controversy, the interview made it even bigger. Because the next chapter reveals the moment that turned a royal scandal into a global public relations disaster. The pressure kept building. Questions about Prince Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein were now everywhere. So in November 2019, Andrew made a bold decision. He would speak publicly. On November 16, 2019, Prince Andrew sat down with journalist Emily Maitlis for a televised interview on BBC Newsnight. The goal was clear: explain his relationship with Epstein and defend himself against allegations made by Virginia Giuffre. The interview lasted almost 50 minutes. Millions of people watched it across the United Kingdom and online. Andrew denied the allegations again. He said he had no memory of meeting Giuffre, even though the 2001 photograph appeared to show them together. But the interview quickly created more problems. One moment in particular caught the public's attention. Andrew said he had a medical condition that made it difficult for him to sweat. He used that claim to question Giuffre's description of an event she said happened in 2001 at a nightclub in London. Many viewers found the explanation strange. Now think about the situation. This was not just a normal interview. It was a member of the British royal family defending himself in connection with a global criminal scandal. News outlets across the world reacted within hours. Newspapers such as The Guardian, The New York Times, and BBC News analyzed the interview line by line. Social media exploded with criticism and disbelief. Here's the part most people miss. Public relations experts, often called PR experts, began saying the interview may have made the situation worse. Public relations means the way organizations manage their public image. Instead of calming the story, the interview pushed it into even bigger headlines. Now watch what happens next. Within just a few days, pressure on the royal family became overwhelming. Charities connected to Andrew started distancing themselves. Companies and public organizations also raised concerns. Then a major announcement came from Buckingham Palace. On November 20, 2019, Prince Andrew released a statement saying he would step back from public royal duties for the foreseeable future. That meant he would stop representing the monarchy at official events. It was a huge moment. A prince who had served in the Royal Navy and represented the United Kingdom around the world was suddenly stepping away from public life. But stepping back did not end the questions. Instead, attention began shifting toward the people closest to him, his family. Some royal insiders later claimed that Sarah Ferguson worked behind the scenes to protect the reputation of her daughters Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie during this storm. These claims were reported by commentators and media sources, though not all details are confirmed. What kind of decisions were being made inside the York household? Because the next stage involved quiet moves away from the public spotlight. Prince Andrew had stepped back from royal duties. But the crisis did not disappear. If anything, the pressure simply moved somewhere else, inside the York family itself. By late 2019 and into 2020, the Epstein scandal was still dominating headlines in the United Kingdom and the United States. News programs, newspapers, and royal commentators continued analyzing every development. And that meant one thing. The reputation of the York family was now under intense scrutiny. At the center of the family was Sarah Ferguson, often called Fergie. Even though she and Prince Andrew divorced in 1996, they remained close and continued raising their daughters together. During the crisis, Fergie publicly supported Andrew. In interviews and public messages, she described him as a good father and continued standing beside him. But according to several royal commentators and media reports, something else was also happening quietly behind the scenes. Think about this. The York daughters, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, were not accused of any wrongdoing. They were not part of the investigation involving Jeffrey Epstein. Yet the scandal still affected them because of their father. So the family faced a difficult decision. How could they protect the daughters' reputations while the global media focused on Andrew? Some royal insiders claimed that careful image management began taking place. Image management simply means controlling how someone appears in public. Reportedly, public appearances by the York sisters were planned very carefully. Certain events were avoided. Other appearances were kept low profile. Here's the part many people miss. Royal families often use communication teams, groups of advisors who help manage public image during a crisis. These teams can decide when a person should appear publicly, when they should stay quiet, and what message should be shared. In 2019 and 2020, the Buckingham Palace communications team was already dealing with intense global media attention. According to royal commentators, protecting the younger members of the family became an important priority. Now watch what happens next. During this time, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie continued focusing on their careers. Beatrice worked in the technology and strategy sector, while Eugenie continued her work in the art world, including roles with galleries and exhibitions. Both sisters also maintained a relatively normal life compared with senior royals. They attended fewer official events and kept most public statements neutral. Still, the public conversation continued. Some media outlets suggested the family was simply protecting their privacy. Others argued it was part of a larger effort to control headlines and reduce damage to the royal brand. But here is the truth. Many of these behind-the-scenes decisions were never officially confirmed. They remain reported or claimed by insiders rather than publicly documented facts. And yet the crisis was still moving forward. Because while the York family managed public appearances, a new development was building across the Atlantic, in the United States legal system. A legal challenge was about to push the story to its most serious point. The answer became clearer when a major legal decision arrived in 2022. The quiet strategy around the York family continued for a while. But the story was far from over. In fact, the biggest moment was still coming. By 2021, the Epstein scandal had already shaken many powerful institutions. Governments, courts, and media organizations were still examining the network of people connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Then a major legal action appeared in the United States. In August 2021, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit against Prince Andrew in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York. A civil lawsuit is a legal case where a person asks for financial damages instead of criminal punishment. Giuffre alleged that Andrew sexually abused her in 2001, when she was 17 years old. According to her claims, the meetings happened in places like London, New York, and Epstein's private island. Prince Andrew strongly denied these allegations through his legal team. Now think about the situation. A member of the British royal family was being taken to court in the United States. The case immediately became international news again. Here's the part most people miss. Civil cases move differently from criminal trials. In a civil case, the goal is not to send someone to prison. Instead, the court decides whether someone must pay financial damages or reach a settlement. During late 2021, Andrew's legal team tried several arguments to have the lawsuit dismissed. Dismissed means ending a case before it reaches a full trial. But in January 2022, U.S. District Judge Lewis Kaplan ruled that the case could move forward. That decision was huge. It meant the lawsuit could continue toward a public trial in New York. And if that happened, members of the royal family might have faced weeks of global media attention inside a courtroom. Now watch what happens next. Only days after that ruling, another announcement came from Buckingham Palace. In January 2022, the palace confirmed that Prince Andrew would lose his military titles and royal patronages. Patronages are official charities or organizations supported by a royal figure. The palace statement also made something very clear. Andrew would defend the case as a private citizen, not as a working royal. That moment marked a turning point. For the first time, the royal institution itself was publicly distancing from Andrew's legal battle. But the story still had one more twist. In February 2022, just weeks before the case could move further toward trial, a new development appeared. Prince Andrew and Virginia Giuffre reached an out-of-court settlement. A settlement means both sides agree to resolve the case without a full trial. The agreement reportedly included a financial payment and a statement acknowledging Giuffre as a victim of Epstein's abuse. However, the settlement did not include an admission of guilt by Andrew. The lawsuit ended there. For many observers, this moment closed the legal chapter of the scandal. But it opened a different question. What would happen to the York family's reputation after years of controversy? Because the final chapter shows how the royal family tried to move forward. The Epstein scandal left a deep mark on one of the most famous families in the world. It began with investigations into Jeffrey Epstein in the early 2000s, then exploded again after his 2019 arrest in the United States. As investigators and journalists looked deeper into Epstein's connections, the name Prince Andrew kept appearing. Photographs from 2001, public allegations from Virginia Giuffre, and the controversial BBC Newsnight interview in November 2019 pushed the story into global headlines. Soon after, Andrew stepped back from royal duties. In January 2022, Buckingham Palace removed his military titles and patronages. Then in February 2022, the civil lawsuit in New York ended through an out-of-court settlement. Through all of this, the wider York family faced intense attention. Sarah Ferguson, Princess Beatrice, and Princess Eugenie were never accused of wrongdoing. Still, their lives were affected by the storm around Andrew. According to reported insider claims, the family tried to manage appearances carefully and protect the daughters from the worst of the public backlash. Think about this. Royal history is full of moments where reputation, public trust, and private family life collide. This was one of those moments. Today, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie continue their private careers and occasionally appear at royal family events. Prince Andrew, however, remains largely absent from official royal duties. So the story leaves one lasting question. How will history remember this chapter of the royal family? Do you think Prince Andrew's interview in 2019 made the situation worse or better? Should family members be affected by scandals connected to someone else? Do you think the royal family handled this crisis the right way? If you want more deep investigations into royal history and hidden royal stories, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.